Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being with us today. The ECHOS webinar, part of the Cancer Mission Impact series, webinar series, practitioner series, Learn, Test, and Come Back. My name is Marius Geantă from Center for Innovation in Medicine in the ECHOS project. I'm the Work Package 3 lead. ECHOS is one of the most important projects at European level related to cancer mission, and the aim is to establish the national cancer mission hubs, networks, and synergies. And in our today webinar, we will discuss about the right to be forgotten in the frame of the both ECHOS project and future national cancer mission hubs. We have a great lineup of speakers today. Professor Françoise Meunier, Professor Chomienne, and Professor Lawler, and I will invite them in a minute to intervene in our discussion. The right to be forgotten, I mentioned that it's a really important topic, both for Europe's Beating Cancer Plan and the EU Cancer Mission, in this frame of being able to assure a more equitable post-cancer life for survivors. And the objective of our today webinar is to hopefully to have a better understanding of the right to be forgotten from multiple perspectives: European perspective, national perspective, policy perspective, and medical perspective. And very important to identify ways to move forward in order to eliminate the financial discrimination against cancer survivors. Thank you once again for being with us today. And I would like to invite our first speaker, Professor Lawler, to set the scene for this topic, the right to be forgotten. Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marius, and delighted to share the platform with my good colleagues and friends, Professor Françoise Meunier and also Professor Chomienne, and really an important area that we want to cover here today. I'm going to set the scene in relation to just some of the challenges that we face. I'm highlighting the issues, and then we will go on to two more presentations, and then we go into a discussion round table. So just to remind you, we're talking about a very significant European population here that we're talking about, 20 million Europeans who are living with or beyond cancer. Next slide. If we look at overall at the challenge that we face in Europe from cancer, every minute 3 European citizens die from cancer. Next slide. But we also need to think about the 20 million European citizens who survive cancer. They also need our support. Next slide, please. If we go back, and Françoise and myself have been working for over a decade on this, one of the things that's really important in Europe in general is to look at inequalities and how we address inequalities. And obviously, what we're talking about today in terms of the right to be forgotten is a particular form of inequality, that is financial discrimination against people who've survived their cancer. When we went back over 10 years ago, we did what at the time was the largest study in relation to cancer inequalities in Europe. And that led to us developing the European Cancer Patient Bill of Rights, which we launched in the European Parliament, and which really became a catalyst for change and also is very much an empowerment tool for cancer patients and has since resonated right across Europe. Next slide, please. And this gave us a vision really for cancer control, but also for cancer survival in Europe. We called it the 70-35 vision, so an average of 70% long-term survival by 2035, with progress not only on cancer control, but also survivor experience and improved quality of life. And you can see there are the 4 ways we're going to achieve this 70-35 vision: working together, sharing best practice, embedding research and innovation, and supporting survivorship, really important. And obviously this aligns to the European Cancer Mission and the European Beating Cancer Plan as well. Next slide, please. The European Cancer Patient Bill of Rights won the European Health Award, which was presented during European Health Forum Gastein. The reason why, because it had Europe-wide impact. Next slide, please. But what I want to focus on now, having given, if you like, that background, is the reality, the financial toxicity of being a cancer survivor. So just imagine the scenario, if you like, The doctor says you have cancer. You face one of the biggest challenges in your life. But you're one of the lucky ones. Your cancer responds to the treatment. 5 years post-treatment, the doctor says to you that you are cured. You have beaten cancer. But there is a sting in the tail. When you go to get a mortgage for that little cottage by the sea that you always wanted, you find that you have to reveal your previous cancer diagnosis, even though you are now cured of the disease. And this may have a negative impact on getting a mortgage, securing house and life insurance, etc. Next slide. Yes, this is a scenario that I've highlighted here, but it's a reality for many people across Europe. You've beaten cancer, you've problems in relation to getting a mortgage, loan, insurance, other financial challenges as well. And so really what we're saying is the right to be forgotten, and this is what Françoise has led over the last 6 to 7 years, ensures that cancer survivors can return to a normal, productive life without facing financial discrimination. Next slide, please. This just shows you some work that was done by the Irish Cancer Society in relation to access to financial products and services. And you can see the differences between those who have cancer and the general population. It's a huge diversity, a huge disparity in relation to all forms of insurance, mortgages, loans, etc. Next slide, please. Françoise will go through in detail what's happening in different countries in Europe in relation to those who have legally adopted the right to be forgotten, and also other scenarios as well. But I just want to emphasize this. This is not about compassion. This is about evidence and acting on that evidence justly. When a cancer professional states that you are cured and international benchmarking concurs, why do financial institutions claim that you are not? Those who are living beyond their disease should not be penalized for a previous cancer diagnosis. And we've just in the last month or so published a paper in Lancet Oncology really highlighting the whole issue and the evidence and also what needs to be done. Next slide, please. So this is not about compassion, as I said, it's about evidence. It's really looking at things like the current cost of living crisis is hard enough for everyone, but much worse for people previously affected by cancer. This is an opportunity for all stakeholders to work together to deliver a pragmatic solution. But it's really important that we act quickly. Cancer survivors cannot wait. The right to be forgotten must be enshrined in law as a matter of urgency. Next slide, please. So 20 million reasons to get it right. Cancer patients should not have to pay twice. Please join us in enshrining the right to be forgotten in national law Europe-wide. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mark Lawler, for setting the scene. And you already mentioned the work, part of the work done by Françoise Meunier, at least in the last 10 years. So I would like to invite you now, Françoise, to take the virtual floor and to continue Mark's presentation. So.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak in that framework of the cancer mission and the cancer hubs. I think it's really important. As an introduction and some type of warning, I would like to mention that when we speak about the right to be forgotten, there is sometimes confusion with the GDPR. And this is nothing to do with GDPR. And that's the reason why I call my own European initiative Ending Discrimination Against Cancer Survivors, because there everybody understands what we are talking about. So the right to be forgotten for the GDPR is one thing, but it is totally a legally different issue than the right to be forgotten. As mentioned, for now more than 50 years that I am an MD, I fight to improve the survival of patients with cancer. And I must say that due to the tremendous progress, we are now facing new challenge, new quality of life issue faced by those patients who are cured. And this is really important for young adults, those who have had cancer, let's say Hodgkin or leukemia when they were a kid, or young adults when they start their life, their professional life and their personal life. So that is really important. And I was very much inspired by what did exist in France in 2016, as a pioneer, French legal framework was really an inspiration to, as I was working on a pan-European level, to ask the question why not all EU citizens could benefit from such legal framework on the right to be forgotten. And in fact, among numerous challenges faced by cancer survivors, you have finding a job, keeping your job, having the right to adopt, having financial access services, and having also psychological problems, sometimes with fear of recurrence and relapse and so on. But I decided to dedicate my activities exclusively to the access of financial service. And why? Because there are numerous challenges, but each challenge requires specific solution. And so if we tackle piece by piece, it will be easier to make progress than while asking the mood. And so my first approach was to look at EU competency in this framework of right to be forgotten. And indeed, it is an EU competency, so every EU citizen who has faced cancer should have similar benefit of the right to be forgotten. Whether you speak about the Treaty of Functioning of EU, the Human Chart of Human Rights, the dignity, the health promotion, anti-discrimination, you name it, there are plenty of articles in the EU legislation giving access to the possibility of having the right to be forgotten on a pan-European level. There was an attempt to get it within the Beating Cancer Plan, mainly via the Code of Conduct. And throughout 2023 and 2024, we had 6 roundtables trying to establish what is the so-called Code of Conduct, and it did not succeed. Because first of all, Code of Conduct is not binding, so it's not a legal framework. And second, the insurer wanted a much longer delay than what we wish, the 5 years. It is now in practice in several European countries. In addition to that, at the EU level, there was the amendment, the revision of the Consumer Credit Directive, but there again, the text is not optimal because it says that it's up to 15 years after the end of treatment that the right to be forgotten could be applied, which is unacceptable. Up to 15 years, it's much too long. And that is the reason why we have to concentrate on member state by member state. What I am currently doing doesn't mean that I will not pursue my activity at the European level, but I think we can achieve positive statement and steps in many countries, and the more countries will have the legal framework, the easier it will be. So we mentioned France. France got it in 2016, and as far as you all know, there is no insurance company which is bankrupt after the implementation of the right to be forgotten. So I don't think it's an excuse to say it's impossible. And France have even go a step further because there are no 2 major insurance companies who either abandon, and I stress, abandon the medical questionnaire, or even decide to no longer put any delay for women with breast cancer. This was an announcement last month. So it is fantastic to see that there is what we call in oncology desescalation. And although initially we put 10 years, then it was 5 years. Now we decrease the number of the need for answering questionnaire. Now we decrease the delays from 0 for the breast cancer. So we really see that they have also a grade of exception, which cancer of much better prognosis. So sometimes for small thyroid cancer, some melanoma, some testis cancer, it could be up to 2 years. So the feasibility general for all cancer is 5 years, with exception with better prognosis. And that is important because now there is the mimic, as I said, France was a type of pioneer, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so Belgium took over in 2020. We are now almost 5 years observation. Initially, it was 10 years, then degraded to 8 years, and now January 1st, it will be 5 years. And in addition, there is now a proposition of law to include travel insurance. And also in Belgium, we already have disability insurance. And so we are discussing the fact that after 5 years, the patient has no longer to declare the past cancer. After France and Belgium, we succeeded to get Netherlands, Italy, Portugal, Romania, and Spain. And all of these are more or less mimicking the French law with some national specificity. And I fully understand that it is normal. For example, the maximum amount that you can get because of the cost of housing is totally different in Luxembourg or in Amsterdam or in Paris or in Belgium. And so it is normal that there are some national specificity, but the main general principle of being forgot, i.e. being able to get access to financial service after 5 years is of more or less current practice in all of those countries. Romania starts with 7 years, but they all have a list of exceptions. In Italy, it is not yet implemented. We are expecting the decree of application. So we don't have yet. But in addition to this, now 8 member states who have the law, which is fantastic. 8 member states have such a law. There are countries who are either discussing or who have established self-regulatory practice. For example, like Czechia, Luxembourg, Denmark, they have some type of code of conduct with recommendations, sometimes conventions which were signed by insurance company like in Luxembourg. And so we are making progress. We are discussing now in Poland and Slovenia, and the word is spreading across the Atlantic and the oceans, because I was told this month that even in Chile and in Costa Rica, they are discussing legal framework, which is very important, because if Europe can pave the way, we have shown that it is feasible. As I said, again, there is no insurance. We got bankrupt, so it's important. My final point will be some concern about on which basis and on which database the insurer establish their risk assessment. Because now we know that we make significant progress very quickly. Do this database take into account the recent progress of tremendous immunotherapy or other modality? That is one concern. And the second is the use of artificial intelligence. I know that you have had a meeting on artificial intelligence, but I read that there are now link and convention between insurer and software company having access to huge database to make assessment of the risk. And there I really am afraid that automated assessment may be another challenge for cancer survivors. So we have to be careful about the extension and expansion of artificial intelligence to make sure that we don't discriminate and that we keep the dignity of the cancer survivor. I think this is really important, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Françoise Meunier, for presenting what is actually the current status of implementing the right to be forgotten at European level. Very good to know that this discussion go beyond Europe in other countries. This is really good. And also you open already some avenues for our discussions on the challenges and how actually the future could look like in the context of artificial intelligence and other major challenges. we'll have enough time for discussion, and I will ask people in the audience actually to express their interest, to intervene. You can use the Q&A or the chat function to comment or to address questions to our speakers today. Now we are moving forward, and it's my pleasure to invite you, Christine Chomienne, the Vice Chair of the Cancer Mission Board, to present the Cancer Mission Board perspective, your perspective on the right to be forgotten.
Thank you very much, Marius, and thank you very much for ECOS to have identified this topic as a topic for the webinars. As ECOS is part of the initiatives of the Cancer Mission, I would like to put us all together on the same level by once again reminding you what is this mission concept of research and innovation. So I'll remind you that during the reflection of the strategy of research and innovation in 2018 for the European Commission, to answer the challenges that the EU citizens were facing and will face in the future, the European Commission decided to set the mission approach to provide a solution and an opportunity and an approach to address the numerous challenges that people face in their daily lives. The mission approach is not like one often sees Kennedy saying, let's go to the moon. It's not Joe Biden saying, let's have a moonshot on cancer. The mission approach is something very specific with very precise criteria. The aim is to be able to provide answers to the citizens' needs by stimulating multiple sectors and multiple forms of cross-actor collaborations to address these problems through the entire research and innovation value chain, from fundamental research to applied research and cutting-edge innovation. So this is not me talking. It's sentences which I have highlighted on the two documents that Professor Mariana Mazzucato was asked by the European Commission to give us the way to move forward in this new way of addressing these challenges through research and innovation. Next slide, please. So the work that we did in the 5 missions that were addressed to support these 5 challenges, one of these was cancer. We linked on the 2 documents that Mariana Mazzucato gave us, and then the mission boards were asked to provide recommendations, which were given in September 2020, and these recommendations help to advise the implementation program of the missions and also for the cancer mission, the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan. Next slide, please. So in these recommendations, there were 13. I want to go back in the process that the mission board used by collecting the needs of the citizens, of the patients, but also of all the stakeholders, whether they were researchers, whether they were clinical practitioners, whether they were policymakers. And with all these, let's say, consultancies, we provided these 13 recommendations. Out of these 13 recommendations, you will see that there's more than 6, more than half, where discrimination and the right to be forgotten is highlighted. So I'll just go through them, but what is important is the title also of these recommendations. On the left here, you have recommendation 9, is to achieve health equity in the EU across the continuum of the disease. And in these recommendations, as you can see, all the recommendations is a small paragraph. In this recommendation, I've highlighted the sentence, policy support to improve access to health promotion, effective return to work policies, mental health, asserting the right to be forgotten. In recommendation 13, we highlighted that the 12 recommendations would not be effective if we did not change our mind and accepted that we needed a transformed cancer culture, communication, and capacity building. we needed to be able to provide what Mark has also highlighted, the evidence, the new framework that cancer is now, which is different from what cancer used to be 10 years ago. And so the sentence here I've highlighted is Europeans still hold on to traditional views and data on cancer. And I think that's what Françoise Meunier was also highlighting too, and the challenge that maybe the insurers were leaning on data that was maybe a bit too old. So Europeans still hold on to traditional views and data on cancer reflected in stigmatizations and discriminations of patients and survivors. Next slide, please, Marius. In recommendation 7, which is entitled Develop an EU-wide research program and policy support to improve the quality of life of cancer patients and survivors, family members and carers, and all persons with an increased risk of cancer. In these recommendations, we really wanted to highlight the importance to improve the quality of life, not only of the patients and the carers, but also of the survivors. For us, this was crucial. We needed new data. The sentence here that I highlighted, it is therefore recommended that countries be supported to develop and implement policies and strategies to help cancer survivors assert the right to be forgotten, which is what Françoise Meunier has been doing, so helping the member states, counteract discrimination and strengthen the legal position of individuals with a family history of cancer, cancer patients, survivors, and their carers. On the right, recommendation 11, we wanted to establish, because the patients had asked us, a European Cancer Patient Digital Center where cancer patients and survivors could find the information that they needed to manage their diseases, to manage also their mental status and also their survivorship, and also to be able to provide the sharing of their data if they wished. In this recommendation, we highlighted again for survivors and their families, the European Cancer Patient Digital Center will also be a global point of contact, offering guidance and support on returning to work, addressing financial issues, and asserting survivors' right. And so the final recommendations, Marius, next slide, please. We had a specific recommendation on childhood cancers and cancers in the adolescent and young adults, cure more and cure better. Here again, the sentence, discrimination of survivors when taken out insurance or mortgage or applying for a job must be banned. As I said, when we prepared our recommendations, we of course consulted multiple stakeholders, and multiple stakeholders gave also their input. And I can of course stress that Mark Lawler indeed gave his input of what we should recommend. Thank you, Mark. And here I wanted to highlight, which is found in our recommendation document, the citizens' feedback, because it's important to put ourselves back in the context. The missions are here to answer the citizens and the patients' needs. So we need to know what their needs are. And this is what they said. For cancer survivors, they wanted support to return to an active and normal life, including reintegrating to work, adapted or not, access to insurance and other financial products, and economic support to guarantee the basic need as a good living conditions. An EU-based platform should collect and share promotional materials and comprehensive information to support patients, family members, and the wider public. So this is in a nutshell. As you can see, we had 13 recommendations, and as you see how important the board members, but also all the stakeholders wanted to really abolish this discrimination, financial or not, that the survivors faced. Next slide, please. So with these recommendations, the implementation plan of the Mission Cancer, which you see here on the left, was launched in September 2021. We were greatly supported by the fact that on the side of DG Santé on health, The President of the European Commission also launched the Europe's Beating Cancer Plan the same year in February 2021. We had a very strong support from the European Parliament and the Becker Committee, with the rapporteur, my long past friend, Véronique Trier-Lenoir, really produced an important report stating the European Parliament resolution on strengthening Europe in the fight against cancer and the right to be forgotten was, of course, stated multiple times. So with these two documents since 2021, so it's not that long ago, just 3 years ago, multiple actions have been launched to be able to implement, following the recommendations of the mission board, all these issues that we want to fight for against the discrimination of survivors. Next slide, please. So the way we're going forward, of course, this is not an easy slide to read, but I'll just remind you that the Cancer Mission Plan leans, like the Europe's Beating Plan, on 4 main objectives, which is, of course, prevent what is preventable, to be able to optimize diagnostics and treatment, to support quality of life, acknowledging the fact that we needed extra understanding of how better we prevent, how better we optimize diagnostics and treatment, and how to understand how we really support quality of life, which goes beyond the definition of just understanding what a cancer cell is. To be able to fulfill these objectives, multiple types of competitive calls are launched with the mission approach, which is to launch multiple calls at the same time so that time is not wasted and we could bring all these informations together. We've launched new networks, new synergies, and I'll come back to the ECOS network. And of course, once again, we continue, and I'll give you an example, to consult the needs of the patients, the citizens, but also the policymakers, because there is also a great need of all these workforce issues to be able to help the implementation. Next slide. So this is in the center, this is our house, which I call the Cancer Mission House, which summarizes once again what I told you, the 3 pillars: prevent what is preventable, optimize diagnosis and treatment, and support quality of life, leaning on an important soil, which is understand, and of course, reaching out to the goal. But as you can see, underneath the roof, there's ensure equitable access. We need to be able to provide the answer for all EU citizens. And so what I really keep thanking the European Commission all the time is that they accepted our request that calls came out every year for each of the 4 objectives. As I said, and as we repeat, if one year there's calls for prevention only, and the next year there's calls for quality of life only, the house will fall down and we will not be able to reach our goal. So here I just wanted to highlight, which I think is probably important in this topic. On the right, in red, you can see it's support quality of life. We wanted to be able to, of course, develop and validate a set of quality of life measures for cancer patients and survivors. We wanted up-to-date questionnaires. We wanted up-to-date questions and needs, and not to be able to lean our research interventions on very old needs that we all knew. Of course, to develop the Europe's Cancer Patient Digital Center, which I've already told you about, which the patients request to be able to give them the information and the support, and also to establish best practices and tools to improve the quality of life of childhood cancer patient survivors and their families in European regions. And then the last I want to highlight here in these mission calls is, of course, the creation of national cancer mission hubs to support the implementation of the mission on cancer. And I'll come back to that because this is crucial. So I'll finish by two slides, I think. Next slide. Yes. So as I said, it's important for us that we update the cancer research community and the cancer policy field of the new needs in 2023 of the patients. And so the European Commission at DG RTD with the Mission Cancer Secretariat launched multiple workshops with young cancer survivors. We were sitting down together to be able to listen to these young survivors, what were their needs. The main recommendations, of course, you will, of course, very agree with, but I just want to highlight the last one, which is here. Support implementation of the right to be forgotten in all EU member states. Apart from all the discrimination that they face, including during the diagnosis, you're too young to have a cancer, we don't understand what you have, you cannot go to this school because you have a cancer. There's also, once again, when they have reached a complete remission and have survived their cancer, the discrimination continues, as Mark Lawler highlighted, you pay twice. Next slide, please. And I'll finish here with the need to be able to implement all these recommendations so that they fit into each member state's priorities, that they fit with each European patient and survivor. And so for this, the European Commission and the Mission Cancer launched the call of ECHOS to establish the national cancer mission hubs. It's helping align national, regional cancer research and innovation programs and national cancer plan towards EU priorities. It's bringing stakeholders and citizens together to foster policy dialogues. Once again, everybody has to be around the table to think in the same manner, to be able to implement in the best possible way. Facilitating cooperation between research and innovation and health ministries. This has been set from the start by the European Commission, DG Santé and DG Research, and this needs to be done also at the member states level, where cancer needs at least 2 ministries, if not 3 or 4. Providing a network for long-term collaboration on the cancer mission and Europe's Beating Cancer Plan and national initiatives. Once again, it's backwards and forwards. It's a bottom-up, it's a top-down, and continuous cycle of helping by implementing guidelines from the European Commission, but also receiving the needs and the priorities and the difficulties from the member states, and then backwards and forwards. It's absolutely crucial. Facilitating peer learning and sharing of best practices. So I think we'll be able to discuss all these topics. I just want to highlight before I forget, because I'm French, in case you hadn't noticed, that the right to be forgotten, as Françoise Meunier highlighted, we have the luck in France that it started in 2016. And since 2016, it's been amended regularly to facilitate more and more these discrimination and the financial burden that these survivors face. But it's not only cancer. What is being done in France for the right to be forgotten is for all chronic diseases that should, and that the evidence exists to be able for them to be forgotten. So it's not only for cancer, it's a legislation which also facilitates this abolishment of discrimination for all patients who have the evidence that this is possible for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine, Chomienne, and all the speakers for your great presentations. And I think indeed in the core of the cancer mission, of the right to be forgotten, of ECHOS project are actually us citizens, and it's so important to be able to capture the needs, as you all actually explained today, to capture the needs of the citizens, of the patients and families, and to try to answer their questions. So this is really important, and I would like to open the floor for discussions from this point on, capturing what is important for patients, but overall for stakeholders. And this topic, the right to be forgotten, is really important from another angle as well. And we discussed several times in ECOS about how to best engage with the stakeholders, the traditional and non-traditional stakeholders. And in this area of the right to be forgotten, and we already heard about insurance companies, financial services, those are not in the immediate focus, let's say, of the people working in the field of cancer research or cancer in general. So my question to you, I'll start with you, Mark, then Françoise, and then you, Christine. What is your advice on how to best engage with different stakeholders groups, being citizens or patients or different type of companies and so on? So
thank you, Marius. Maybe you want to shut down the slides so we can see the so maybe I'll start and then obviously go on to Françoise and Christine. One of the things that's really important is the engagement with national governments. And it's critical because obviously in relation to what we've said and what Françoise has highlighted and what Françoise has spearheaded, whereas, as Christine showed, there is a lot of mechanisms at European level and highlighted in different aspects of the plan and the mission. It has to be instigated at national level. So I'll just give you two examples in relation to what we've done both in Ireland and in Northern Ireland. So in Ireland, working with the Irish Cancer Society, we've engaged very closely with the government in relation to actually presenting the right to be forgotten at what's called the cross-party group on cancer. So that's the two houses of parliament in Ireland, cross-party, so different political parties, but united in a common cause. And that's been very effective and has allowed us to bring the right to be forgotten towards legislation in Ireland. So it's really important to engage with the political stakeholders in that regard. And we're also doing the same in Northern Ireland, and I'll be presenting to the all-party group on cancer in the Northern Ireland Parliament in January. And the second thing is, we have to engage with the industry. And we've had some very actually good pragmatic conversations with the industry, which identifies the opportunity, but also the challenges. And I'll give you an example. Recently, we had a meeting that was facilitated by my good colleague, Kieran Briscoe, in relation to with members of the Department of Finance and also the insurance industry in Ireland. And Ireland at the moment has a code of conduct. And while the code of conduct is better than nothing, it's not ideal. And I'll show you the reason why it is not ideal. Some of the insurance companies I've talked to have very much taken on the code and are delivering on the code and are actually providing services for cancer survivors, but others are not and are ignoring the code. So that's the problem with the code is it's a, if you want to, you can do it, but it's not legally binding. And that's why Françoise has fought for and has rejected, just going for a code of conduct. And I would say I would have to agree. Particularly as our meetings, some of the facilitations that we had in Europe were frankly very disappointing, particularly when an insurance company is comparing a cancer survivor to a car, showing absolutely no way in which they can understand what's going on, no sympathy, no compassion. That is not acceptable, and I called it out at the time. But the other thing is actually to talk to people. And I was talking recently at a conference in Dublin, and in the break after I'd given the presentation was talking about this to a number of colleagues, including somebody who'd actually organized the conference. And he said his sister was 20 years post-lung cancer diagnosis, cured, and she still has problems getting travel insurance at any reasonable level for her to go on holiday. So that is the nub of the problem. 20 years post, and yet is still being discriminated against. So I think we need we need engagement with the industry. We have to do it in a way in which we can actually work together. But it's those patient testimonies, those stories that you hear. We need to collect more of those and use them as part of the driver in relation to getting things done at the national level.
Thank you, Mark. Françoise, what's your perspective on how to best engage?
Well, yes, I agree with Mark's analysis. And I think in my own experience, what was the most useful is patient advocacies and patient advocate explaining their stories. And that is the more important thing to convince politicians in each member state, is to identify patient survivor who can explain practical situation and what that they face. And then the politicians are more easy to be convinced. I am a little bit mitigated about industry, because I was extremely disappointed by the attitude of the, like Mark was saying, of the European Federation of Insurance. On the other way, when I see what's going on in France, and the CNP last month, who a company who says, well, we will assume the extra risk, because it's true that fundamentally an insurer has the right, the legal right, to assess the risk that he takes, because he has to measure what risk he is taking. That is normal, it's legal. But for some, if the extra risk is minimal, some, like CNP, decide for breast cancer, after the end of treatment, we no longer put a waiting period, we assume the extra risk. And that is fantastic. If all the insurers were reacting like this, it would be better. Then you hear argument, but then everybody will pay more. I am not convinced that the risk or the extra risk is such high. First of all, not all cancer survivors do require a loan. You know, it depends the age. Some do no longer need a loan, some may need a loan or travel insurance, but this doesn't represent millions of people. It can affect a lot of people and dramatically affect, but it's not millions of Europeans who will suddenly require a loan after cancer treatment. So we should again take example of what is effectively working, and even if insurance themselves do de-escalation, either by abandoning questionnaire or by taking the risk themselves, we should just congratulate them.
Thank you, Christine Chomienne.
So as I've said, bringing stakeholders together is part of the mission way of working. And it's really difficult. You can bring, of course, the stakeholders that you know and the ones who already trust you. But if you want to make a difference and if you want to find a solution for a challenge, just like cancer, you need to bring stakeholders who have never sat down at a table with you. And so this is really very, very difficult. I can just really, you know, some of you who know me will understand my way of talking, but you may be successful in getting the appointment with the people coming to your meeting. But then you also have people who come to the meeting, which is already a success, but who don't want to listen or to change their way of thinking. And even if you talk to them with data, they go back to their usual way of thinking and they have not changed their mind. So bringing together stakeholders is part of the difficult, let's say, challenges that the mission concept faces regularly. And I was saying Saturday, you can probably remember, Marius, at the meeting, that we're very good at the European Commission. We're very good here also. We're here together. We understand, all of us. We keep bringing tons of advice, right? But we need to be doing this work, like Françoise is saying, at the member states level. Of course, it's important, the members of parliament, because yes, Mark, members of parliament are the ones who have been elected by the citizens, and theoretically, they need to be able to provide the answer to the citizens who have elected them. But apart from the members of parliament, we really need to be able to bring the stakeholders of the member states, of each member state, together around the table. And for this, sometimes it's complicated when you come with a European Commission hat. You need to be able to, as you all know, I mean, you've all been establishing various stakeholders meeting. You need to be able to know which is the person you need to contact for this specific topic. And so for the right to be forgotten, it's important, I think, as Françoise said, of course, to have the support of the patients and the survivors. They need to be there, and they need to be, like they all know now how to be, not emotional and to come. We have the responsibility to come with the evidence. Mark has repeated it. It's not compassionate. It's not the insurers who are going to be nice because they want to help survivors. There's evidence. Right? It's as you say, Françoise, they know how to assess risk. It's part of their job. To assess risks, I assume that they lean on data. So that's why I think that our responsibility is to provide the evidence, but not the evidence that you have on the website for all Europe compared to China, the United States. It's evidence that you need for each member state. Each member state needs to have its own evidence so that at least the insurers, once again, the one who want to sit around the table will have the possibility to have this evidence and to assess the risk and hopefully fall back onto the conclusions that all the other countries have been. Maybe for some countries, and listening to you once again, Françoise, they need this step-by-step procedure. They need to have the evidence maybe of what each country is facing with the number of survivors. I would more or less push for the fact that most of the countries have various, let's say, numbers of survivors. So one may suppose that those who still are refractory do not have that much survivors to be able to answer to. But I think it's important that they lean on their own evidence, and we should be able to provide this evidence. And once again, this is in the remit of research. This is in the remit of collecting the right data. And this is in the remit of research to conduct the right economic studies to be able to help the insurers to make their decisions if they don't want to do it themselves. And if they don't want to do it themselves, then yes, I agree, Françoise, it's a decision from the government of each member state. It's these governments who need to be convinced by the evidence that we are going to provide so that they may, through a legal device, impose on the insurers that they should be able to follow it. So once again, I think bringing together the stakeholders is difficult. Changing the mind of the stakeholders is even more difficult, but our responsibility is to provide the evidence so that they can be more willing to change their mind.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, no, just something that Christine says there very much resonates and relates to actually the last meeting we had with the Department of Finance in Ireland. It's that, you know, the exact same thing isn't going to work in every single country. There are, you know, variations on things that will work, and some principles will be the same. One of the conversations we had, a very positive conversation with the Department of Finance, and one of the things that's come out of this, and this is just a meeting we had recently, was in fact to bring from different countries where it has been implemented and look at different scenarios and try and match those scenarios with how it would work in terms of legislation in the country you're trying to bring to be extra to those 8 that have already decided. And so one of the things we're going to do is actually do that. So provide not only the evidence in Ireland, but also here's some examples. Here's how it works in France. Here's how it works in Belgium. Here's how it works in Spain. Which is the closest to what might work in your country? How does it need to be tweaked? What's the key piece? And so I think that's really important, so that we're making it easier for governments to actually make decisions, because we're providing them with the roadmap of how they deliver for their individual country.
So I would comment that in order to keep this topic on the political agenda, having in mind that things are moving sometimes very fast, at least in some parts of Europe, from a political perspective, I think the future national cancer mission hubs will play a very important role because engaging in the pentahelix model, actually all the stakeholders, this I think would be a great foundation for this topic, right to be forgotten, actually to move beyond political cycles, political crises, and so on. That's why we are here today, to explore the right to be forgotten in the context of cancer mission and ECOS and future national cancer mission hubs. But I would like to continue on evidences. To your point, Christine Chomienne, indeed, we need to research, and sometimes it's not so easy to do this type of research and to generate evidences at the country level. But in your intervention, Françoise, you mentioned already, and I would like maybe to enter into more details from France, from Belgium, because are the countries who has already an experience on implementing the right to be forgotten without an impact when it comes to the business of the insurers or the financial services. So I think this type of message is really important.
Yes. In fact, there is an assessment, a regular assessment in France. I think it's made mainly by INCA, but also in CERM, I think there is a woman in CERM, I just forgot her name, who is very much involved in that, in analyze this database, but under the framework of INCA. And in Belgium, we have the KCE, Kenniscentrum, who guides the government and working closely with the registry. Of course, here we come to a sticky point, is that not all EU countries have a very good cancer registry and survival, but there can be regular update on the database of survival rate if there is a good collaboration, and this comes back to the research topic that Christine was mentioning. Good research is also based on good registries, and it's not always optimal in all the countries. Now, if in the registries you don't have necessarily an image of what's going on right now in the therapeutic field, and so you are always a few years behind because the treatment keep moving and keep adapting, and so the data that you can get from those large databases or national or regional are not necessarily reflecting really up-to-date information. For example, I had a testimony of a woman with triple negative breast cancer, and in the database you will find a terrible prognosis for triple negative, while there are triple negative who can be cured, well, cure or long-term remission, as we say, for breast cancer. And so to have really accurate evaluation of the risk, same thing for melanoma patient, with the current new treatment is sometimes a challenge. And that requires research and up-to-date database.
Yes, thank you, Françoise Meunier, and thank you to the people who are with us today in the audience. We already have a lot of questions, and I would like to actually to address one or two questions now, because some are linked with this moment in our discussion. So the first question is, since insurance in Europe is dominated by relatively few large conglomerates, will some kind of TripAdvisor star system help patients or ex-patients to choose an insurance that facilitates based the right to be forgotten?
Can I take that as a start? I saw Gilly posted that. I thought it was a brilliant question. So great, Gilly, for challenging us. You know, I definitely think we should be calling out the insurance companies more in terms of what they're doing. So I do think that there's an opportunity. Now, whether we go right to a TripAdvisor approach straight up might be a bit challenging, but I certainly think we should be thinking that way. And we certainly should, because we found it in Ireland, some companies are really good and actually have thought about this issue a lot and actually recognize the right to be forgotten as a way of actually treating their customers better. And so I think, looking at ways in which we can actually call out some of the bad practices, but also highlight some of the good practices would actually be useful, I think, in this discussion debate. But as Françoise said, I mean, we were both very disappointed by the consultations that happened because we felt they were not helpful, were actually not informed in a lot of situations, and it was quite disappointing.
Any other comments on this TripAdvisor star system?
Yes, I can.
Yes, Christian.
And of course, Gilly knows it also. It's part of the request of the Europe Cancer Patient Digital Center, where we would wish that each patient would find in this house, once again, the room where they can have the information on what they need for their financial support and other types of support. And one can easily imagine, Gilly, that yes, in this information, room, which is meant to be adapted to the cancer, to the age, and also to the country. Not only do we wish to highlight maybe the best reference center where they could have information about a clinical trial or about a research project where they can participate in their quality of life situation, but where, yes, they could find maybe different types of insurers, and the one who would probably deal more with their type of discrimination than another type of insurer. Why not? But once again, as we said, it's up to the patients also to tell us what they want. But it's also the difficulty of working with stakeholders. We cannot, as intelligent as we are, know what the insurers want. As Mark was saying when he was sitting with them, and also Françoise, but it's the same thing for healthcare professional and HTAs. We need to sit down with them to know what type of evidence they want. Because we may provide evidence, or they may be able to reach out to some evidence which is not the evidence they need, or it's not the evidence we want to give them. So I think it's important for each member state and maybe for each insurers, but once again, we only get the willing ones who sit at the table, that they tell us, well, okay, I want eventually to change, but this is the evidence I need. Can you give me this and this? This is one way, but the most important, I think, is the example of the other countries. Of course, there must be, Mark said it, adaptations between one country to another, maybe between one insurance company and another, right? But a lot has already been done in other countries, right? Françoise, of course, understood that she needed to do the work, not only for the ministries of each member state, but also for the insurers, because she translated what had been done in France and etc. So the examples are already here, and I can imagine the frustration of people like Mark and Françoise. It's been already decided by other countries. Of course, there are differences between member states, but come off it, not that much. And so the adaptation should not really need so much energy. That's me being annoyed. Sorry.
I mean, the other thing that's very interesting as well is the amount of people who don't know about this discrimination at all. And it varies obviously from country to country. United Kingdom, could not believe it when I presented at a number of different fora. And a lot of people came up and were asking me. So I think there's still an education.
Yes,
I mean,
yes,
Françoise has been, Françoise is my hero, by the way, just so that everybody knows, and has really, taken this and run with it and delivered it. But sometimes we talk about, how do we get that knowledge into other countries, into places maybe that don't think about it? I mean, I was amazed. I mean, we've been very fortunate in Northern Ireland, working with Cancer Focus Northern Ireland, the local charity, and that's allowed us to really bring it onto the table. And as I said, we'll be presenting it at the all-party group on cancer, but certain parts of the UK had no idea that this even existed. So there is still an education piece that we have simply to make people aware, and then it's okay, now you're aware, now let's do something about it.
Good. We have two comments and questions related to the potential role of the European institutions in the right to be forgotten. So one question is, or European Commission can push the right to be forgotten to become an European directive? And there is another comment, bringing stakeholders together, it's a bottom-up approach. National cancer mission hubs and others can help doing that, but European Commission must work on top-down support by liaising with EU Council, where the Prime Minister, Minister of Health and Research and Development and Social Welfare are represented. Françoise, your mic.
If I want to talk about the possibility of an European directive, what I am targeting and aiming, and I think should be, is what I call an harmonized legal framework. How do you reach that? We could get definitely not a code of conduct, which is not binding. So we will have a code of conduct and everybody will say we have something and nothing will move. So that is not an option. An European directive, perhaps, but then, as you know, all the directive must be translated in national legislation, and there is some quite wide range of adaptation when the directive is transposed to the national legislation. Ideally, it could be a regulation, but that I think is a dream, but we should aim for our dreams, and it could be difficult to get a regulation. But nothing prevents us to move on both sides, trying to get an European legislation. Perhaps the directive would be easier than a regulation. But you remember, you know, I was deeply involved in clinical research. We had an European clinical trials directive, which was a disaster, and which took 10 years to be changed in an EU regulation because we realized that it was killing European research if we kept the directive. So the directive is not always a solution unless it's a perfect directive translated in all the member states, which was not the case for the... That's why I am a little bit hesitant, because I had to face the problems of the clinical research directive in the beginning of the century. But I believe in, as Christine was saying, in member state by member state. It is sometimes easier with local patient, local politician, to make them understand that the law exists, that it's not that complicated to implement. And in fact, honestly, I am impressed by the fact that we have 8 member states with the legislation. I think it's a fantastic success to already have 8. And so the rolling ball should keep going. And just take the example of what is feasible, not feasible. As I said, there is national specificity in relation to the cost. So you can put a ceiling. In Belgium, there is no ceiling. In Luxembourg, it's 1 million. In France, it depends of your age and when you plan to reimburse. So in Netherlands, it's 272,000 euro for your loan. So you can have the adaptation, but I think it's more feasible on a national member state level than to reach the whole EU.
Thank you.
Because also in the national, you can impact on national insurance company. Of course, they have reinsurance, but I think it's easier than to rely only on the European Federation of Insurers, which is an hermetic system.
Thank you, Françoise. And I think, yes, Mark, go ahead.
By the way, the only reason we have 8 is because of Françoise. We had 1 when Françoise started this work. So that's why we have 8, and another 5 that are have a code of conduct. So that's the reason why. So Françoise is too, would not say that herself, but I'll say it. I can call it out, and it's been a super leadership over the last 5 years.
I confirm.
And Françoise, you actually answer another question who asked you about the best way to make it easier for all countries to adopt the right to be forgotten. You already explained that the focus at the national level is probably the best way to do it. And thank you once again for this comment and question. I would like to move to somehow to another topic, of course, related to the right to be forgotten. And this is based on another comment from somebody in the audience, saying that the right to be forgotten and those experience cancer at a young stage is well established. But what about those that face cancer in later stage of life and due to life course and their marriage, or they lose their work or something else, resulting in reduced purchase power? And do you have data on how the right to be forgotten is helping the older population? So this is the comment and the question. Who would like to go first?
Well, my initial answer to that is that older people, let's say after 55, if I can call that older people, do no longer require loans and mortgage. And it is before 50 that you establish yourself and that you require a loan and a mortgage. So those are really the ones that we should target it. There are other issues, and I don't deny the challenge that I mentioned at the beginning of my speech of being a cancer survivor. But as I said, there are specific problems requiring specific solutions, and we cannot mix the whole issue. Here, the right to be forgotten is dedicated to access to financial services. And I have not faced a lot of people above 50 who tell me that they don't get a loan. They have different problems, but it's not going to be solved by the right to be forgotten legal framework.
Yeah, I think one of the things probably we need to do, and it goes back to what Christine and Françoise have said in different ways, is keep on collecting the evidence. Because we're now starting to get a scenario. If you look at France, for example, we have 8 years of evidence of how the right to be forgotten works, and sort of by looking to see, you know, what are the populations that were most affected before and now are doing better in the new situation, probably tells us as well a little bit about where is the pinch point in relation to cancer survivors, you know, those living beyond their cancer diagnosis. So I think it's still important to be collected. So if you like, we're collecting one set of data in relation to cancer survival that we're using as evidence to say that, you know, you're cured at 5 years. But we need to be also collecting the evidence to say what makes a difference in relation to the insurance companies if we have a right to be forgotten in place or a code of conduct in place. I think that's probably the next stage of that sort of data collection and use of intelligence then to inform that next stage. Because I think that can be really useful as a way of, you know, I think people look to the French model, increasingly are now looking to what's happened in Belgium, what's happened in Spain. So I think that evidence really helps us to maybe persuade more national bodies to say, yes, we need to go down that road as well.
Christine.
Yes, I'm thinking out loud because it's not my experience of working on how to bring the evidence to the policymakers in each country or to the insurers. But the experience of Marc and Françoise showed that by sitting with umbrella organizations of insurers is not what was effective. By working with an umbrella organizations, which can be the Beating Cancer Plan, is probably not the best solution either. It finishes up with a directive, or not a directive, of a code of conduct. So I'll repeat once again what I've said. I think it's important that for the member states who haven't already got it, is once again, Marc, you've highlighted, we believe everybody knows, but of course not everybody knows, even UK. So we need once again to continue to inform, and I will really stress see what data do they need, because once again, we can spend a lot of time and energy collecting data, and that will be time. We don't want to wait, and the patients don't want to wait. What type of data would they need? And probably the member states first, to be able to understand that we need to go, when I say member states, it's governments. And then after that, to see with the insurers of these countries, the willing ones, what they would, let's say, contest that the government is providing as data that they think is not adapted to their needs and to their assessment. What Mark said also, maybe, I don't know, I thought of something because you were talking about it. We maybe also need some, I don't know, reward, competitiveness, maybe, unless I'm wrong, Françoise and Mark, we have no data which shows what is the benefit on the survivor and the quality of life of the French survivors of what this has done. Do we have data, a survey coming back from the survivors who have had a loan in France and who feel much better because they no longer have this discrimination? Unless I'm wrong, we don't have this data. No. I think it would be important to be able to measure it so that we can really show the other countries, well, look, they're happy. We've solved some of their issues in this country, and etc.
We have some testimony, yes, but in fact, it's very difficult to give accurate data because, first of all, we don't know how many of the survivors do require a loan. This is a black box. We don't know how many do require a loan and how many get it or not. We hear here and there those who try to get one and who don't get one. In Belgium, we have a bureau de suivi, and the bureau de suivi give every 2 years a report of the people where they can do an appeal. If they don't get the insurance, they can introduce an appeal to a committee, which is called bureau de suivi. And there we can get more or less those who did not get it because they make an appeal. But the denominator, how many are contacting an insurance and want to get a loan, we don't know. And I don't know how to get that information unless we launch at the EU or at the national level a large survey research project to assess that. Because we don't know what is the denominator. Those who ask and don't get, where do we collect them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the data I presented from the Irish Cancer Society addresses some of that, not everything, but certainly that's one of the things they were able to do, was to be able to go out to both cancer patients and people who did not have cancer, and actually ask them in relation to their ability to access financial mortgages, mortgage protection, etc. So they were able to actually go down through that and then identify a difference between the two, in terms of that, which was in some regions in the region of 30% difference. So there is that data. So doing that type of a survey and probably maybe looking at collecting a little bit more information, certainly I think would help. That was sort of what I was alluding to when I was saying we need more evidence now from where it's been successful. So that's an example of setting the scene as to why we need it, and that's why the Irish Cancer Society did it. But I think we also need, as you've asked, Christine, and you highlighted, Françoise, is some information of what is the situation on the ground post right to be forgotten legislation being introduced.
Yeah, but there are now a plea for creating long-term follow-up clinic, because the oncologists who took care of the patient and who cure them no longer have the time to follow up all of those different challenges post-treatment. And there is a plea for the creation of long-term survivorship clinic with dedicated experts with a whole all aspects in work, in adoption, because adoption is another major problem where you cannot adopt a child if you had cancer and so on, job. And so perhaps if the mission, and if I understand correctly, there is this willingness to create long-term survivorship clinic with dedicated experts. If it's not in the mission, it's probably in the Beating Cancer Plan, but I know I have heard the topic. And there, if we have indeed people who follow long-term, what do they become 10 years after treatment? A child who had leukemia, 10 years, 15 years later, what does he become? We don't know. And so those long-term follow-up clinics could be instrumental to collect those information. And when once a year they go to the long-term clinic, do they have secondary tumor? Do they have different pulmonary fibrosis or whatever? Do they get a loan, yes or not? Could they adopt, yes or no? All of those is a whole new area of research that needs to be established, which currently today does not exist. And it's important because we are curing more than 50% of the patient, which was not the case in 74 when I was graduate and it was a death sentence. So now that we cure them, we should bother to know what do they become 10, 15 years later. And it's not the oncologist who maybe died and who is going to follow up all of those cure patients.
I think we have a great comment and potential answer on how to move forward in the Q&A. I think the eCPDC could be a useful data collection point for this use data, and I was just about to ask you this. First you, Christine, and maybe you, Mark, and maybe to extend this discussion on the European Cancer Patient Digital Center, but overall European health data space. So because we should probably consider the bigger frame at European level when it comes to data, including cancer data, and to look from this broad perspective to the right to be forgotten too. So, Christine?
Yes, so yes, I'm happy to start because the European Cancer Patient Digital Center was something that the patient asked us and was in the recommendation of the Cancer Mission Board. The idea is really an individual person who has, with the digital tools that most of them know how to go about, or their carers or the family, to be able to find in this tool all their information. It can be their next appointment. It can be the last prescription. It can be the summary of their disease, so that when they travel, they can easily download it and give it to somebody. But it can also be, as I've said, the possibility to be able to find the information that they want, whether it's for a clinical trial or whether it's a research project or whether it's the financial support that we're discussing about. It's also a possibility, but that's where, unfortunately, a bias has been installed, is as they will have their own data with them on this website, app, cloud, whatever you want to call it, there's a possibility that they can also share that data for research projects. And one can also imagine, because I know that some apps for survivors and patients already do that, it's the possibility, a bit like what Françoise was alluding to, it can be a physical center to monitor a survivor and to know eventually what types of side effects the survivor can have from various treatments that he has had or she has had. But the tool, the digital tool, can also be a mean for the patient and the survivor to say, well, today I'm feeling rotten. Today I would like to have a loan and I didn't have it. Today I had a loan. Yes, wait, I've got it, right? So this could also be a possibility to have what we pompously call real world data, not only on the biological data of the survivor, but also on his mental status, of his needs, right? I'm 30 and I want to have a loan. I'm 55. My wife has left me, if I've understood the question well, and I need to have some more financial support, or I need eventually to sell my house and buy a new one, and how am I going to manage that, right? So yes, this digital center should be able to answer all this, right? It's a huge, ambitious project. It needs to be done individually. It needs to be done at each member state in the language, blah, blah, blah. And you can only imagine what it goes after that. It can also be a link of what different types of tools are there. And probably Gilly can also bring some input because she knows the project well also. So my only concern is that we need to be able to do steps that in the cancer mission concept can provide the answers now to the patients and the survivors, so that the overall goal and perfect ECDPC will be there in, I don't know, 10 years. But we need to be able to provide solutions now. Even if they are not the whole picture, we need to be able to provide the solutions rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, very much agree with Christine. I mean, it goes back actually to what Gilly said in relation to, you know, TripAdvisor. If we're able to identify clinical trials that we can go on through the digital app, why wouldn't we be able to identify insurance companies that are more favorable in relation to what they provide? So it's just there's certainly no technical reason and probably no philosophical reason either. But Christine is right. We need to be doing things that actually, you know, are happening in the here and now rather than aspirational in 5 to 10 years time. I mean, one of the things that is interesting though is we're starting to see much more collection of data of people living with cancer, survivorship data, including in some of the inequalities. So, for example, the European Cancer Pulse is collecting that type of data. Hopefully the European Inequalities Registry will expand what it collects to include more survival type data. So I think, you know, we are getting to the scene where people can think that way. And I think, you know, it's obviously is a hugely ambitious project, lots of challenges, but, you know, the prize is huge. And the prize is huge for the cancer patient and the cancer survivor. So I think there's a great opportunity there.
I will stay for one more question in this topic of cancer data. There is a question: do insurance companies have easily access to data from cancer registries, and they would like help them? And it's a quote. This would like help them in assessing the risk more accurately. So
yeah, maybe I can start on that question,
yeah,
and then leave to both Françoise and Christine. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things we experienced, and Françoise alluded to it earlier when we were at some of these round tables with the different stakeholders, was that the data was being used was either very old and out of date, or was a very selective, narrow focus on a particular form of cancer with a particular, you know, that wasn't really generalizable to the population. So getting back to Christine's point, I mean, we want one truth. We don't want 20 different, you know, things that say different things about whether you're surviving at 5 years or not. So I think one of the things that is incumbent upon the community is to provide that one truth, that gold standard, that benchmark. And then we can all judge by that same benchmark. I mean, I chair the International Cancer Benchmarking Partnership. One of the things we do is benchmark survival in different countries and then look to see why are there differences, why are there these inequalities, and use that data then to inform, you know, how we make things better. And so I think if we can have a clear sort of evidence that actually is irrefutable, but also is widely used, so that we're not using 20 different versions and taking an exception to try and prove a rule, which is it's what certainly both of us felt was being done during some of those conversations.
Yes, I can just... Vas-y, Françoise.
Concerning the link between registries and insurers, to my knowledge, there is no bridges between registries and insurers. Every year, the registries make large publication on the survival per gender, woman, men, and per cancer. But it's general, the breasts are all lumped together, and we all know that there are 10 different breast cancer, if not more. So I don't think so. In Belgium, it's the KCE who is linking to, which is a governmental organization of research, which is linking to the registry, and the KCE has access to the different type of breast cancer, for example. That's how we have done this escalation on breast cancer in Belgium. But I don't think the general agglomerated registry publication are useful for the insurer, because the insurer wants probably granularity, which is not made available.
Christine.
No, I want to just to follow up on what Mark was saying. I think maybe because I keep repeating, some countries have already collected sufficient data at 10 years, 7 years, 5 years for each diseases, so that they can move forward in their decision. It would be easier to ask the other countries, well, do you agree with this data for your country or do not, rather than to make each country start their work again. The data is there. Globally, I agree, but some countries, at least I listened to France and to the meeting that that Françoise did this year with Belgium. Some countries have already validated with their own data the general information and evidence that Mark was talking about. So I'm always very happy to tell people what to do, but I mean, it would be very, it would be for me, I think, easier to say to each country who hasn't got it, does your country validate this data or not? And where do you think? And then it would be easier to maybe adapt. But if they have to start from scratch, and I agree with Françoise, it's probably difficult. They don't know where to get the data. Then somebody's going to bring out RGPD or whatever. I mean, it's going to be ages, right? So maybe a yes or no, we agree, we don't agree, and then maybe make life easier for them and for us. I mean, patients.
Yes, indeed, many countries have already adopted the right to be forgotten in their legal framework. And the question for you is, do you consider the work is done in these countries? What else can we ask implementation evidences to this country? You already explained, but if it's something that wasn't mentioned and it's important to be done at the country level, please, now is moment to the moment to add.
But it's true that implementation is sometimes difficult and hectic. I have feedback from Spain that it's not optimal, but the beginning is hectic. And we can admit that even if you have a law, it takes 18 months to settle and to fix the rules and to make everybody aware and so and so. So it doesn't go overnight. The law is there and that's it. In my experience, it takes 18 months.
But I still would take this opportunity because, as you can imagine, both the Beating Cancer Plan and the Mission on Cancer is not only implementing and started to implement, but we're all already been asked, and so what have you implemented, right? So we're meant to monitor what we haven't started, but never mind. I think it would be also important, we've said it already, well, actually I've said it, sorry, that it would be nice to be able to check, as you say, Françoise, it takes time for it to be implemented, but then once it's implemented, what has it changed for the survivors, right? I think I would be very happy to be able to, because as I agree with you, I've had some requests in France also when I was at the French cancer plan. Some patients, of course, did not know, were not aware. And some people, even in France, when they asked, they didn't get the answer, or somebody did say it's not possible, right? So even when it's there, it's not always very easy for patients to find the information and to be accepted. And as Gilly said, sometimes they don't want to ask. So it would be nice to have a digital way of having the information. So yes, I think this needs to be, we need to try and assess what is being implemented so that it really is useful, hopefully.
two other suggestions coming from the audience today. Very active, great engagement, and thank you so much all for this. So one suggestion is to actually to be able to assess the status in the countries through joint action. I think there is something to be considered. And another suggestion is, why not a quality of life cluster, the projects funded under the cancer mission, and is mentioned the EU on QL project. Why not the project in the quality of life cluster to come up with a proposal on how to collect the data we are talking about to monitor the implementation of the right to be forgotten. So really practical suggestion. Thank you so much. So, and I would like to move forward to another topic related to the right to be forgotten, the topic of inequalities. And coming back to the map of EU you presented, Françoise, we can see that this time, when it comes to inequalities, it's not so clear. Actually, we cannot speak properly about East-West, because we have at least Romania in Eastern Europe being like pioneer this time. But if you go into more into granularity when it comes to inequalities, we can maybe discuss a bit about vulnerable groups, about the Roma population, about people living in rural areas, about migrants. This is an issue at European level now. And it would be really interesting to find your perspectives on the right to be forgotten and cancer inequalities.
Yeah, I mean, obviously very interlinked. You know, very importantly, if you look at rural populations, for example, in terms of we know that there are greater inequalities. We've actually published there recently European Code of Cancer Practice, particularly for rural areas, to address some of that. But you can imagine in that setting, you've got that extra burden of inequalities, plus layered on top of that, you know, maybe not being able to get access to appropriate insurance, travel insurance, mortgage, etc. So I think, unfortunately, what will happen is that it'll accentuate inequalities by also having inequalities in relation to financial toxicity. And probably as well, you'll find that in a lot of those situations, general financial toxicity, not specifically related to the right to be forgotten, will already be embedded, and then this will layer on top of that. So unfortunately, as is the case with a lot of situations in relation to populations that are suffering inequalities, further inequalities that become part of that tend to accentuate the problem. And unfortunately, that seems to be the case as well in relation to the right to be forgotten.
I can add two things. The first is that I see it, and I've said it already, and some of the comments I think from Gilly also alludes to that. It's also the inequality inside one country, and so the rural example that Mark came is whatever. I mean, it's the idea that people do not have the information, but it's right. It goes for everything, right? not just for the right to be forgotten. How do we get this information out, right? It's something that we know also for screening and for the change in health behavior. We talk about it, but we don't know how to do it. I think also is that because our research community has not got this expertise to know how to communicate and to evaluate that the communication system is working or not. So it's all this that we talk about, you know, human sciences and etc. It's not sufficiently, I think, helped and developed, and we don't reach out sufficiently for this. You're also very aware, Marius, that it's not just for cancer. Yeah. I think it's a wider approach. I've also said that the right to be forgotten and discrimination, fighting discrimination, is just not for cancer. It's also for other diseases. And in this new modern approach of One Health, right, I think it would be also important to realize what can be done and with whom, so that this information, and we're talking about the right to be forgotten, reaches also. And it's something maybe that we can ask the countries who already have the benefit of having it already legally existing. Are you aware of raising inequality in your country? Because some know and some do not. Have you progressed? Do you have the measure now to be able to see in 2 or 3 years' time whether something has been done? What we are lacking, and I've only let's say really seen the problem, is that we're asked to measure our improvements, right? But if we have not thought at the beginning of what measures we would need or what indicators we would like to measure in 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years, then it's no use setting up the action. So I'm saying here, but I'm also taking it for myself. It's important even in the countries who have it, but probably better, Françoise, for the countries who don't have it, that they already, if they start to launch and to prepare for measuring what input they want to measure and what input they would like to be able to show, because there was a benefit to be able to put it up. And the question that Marius raised, are we spurring more inequalities, because some know and some do not, or have we got the measures to communicate better and make sure that everybody has access to this wonderful measure of the right to be forgotten?
Françoise, a comment on inequalities?
No, I fully agree that we should try to collect, but when we call about the migrants, for example, we have to distinguish those who have the authorization to stay and those who don't, because I think the insurer are providing insurance and loans only of those who are authorized to stay. So you see, there is already an inequality from the start.
Yes.
Yes. And then maybe to add to your point, Christine, about other diseases where the right to be forgotten could play a role. Maybe this would be a policy opportunity as well. Look into the discussions at the European level around mental health, around cardiovascular health. Why not? Why not? Maybe some countries will be more open to approach the right to be forgotten from a mental health perspective or from a cardiovascular. I think this should translate somehow the cancer and to go to other areas and to build these synergies.
But there I would like to make a comment, because it's true that I am regularly approached by people who have the so-called chronic disease and so on. And I think we should make a distinction and not mix everybody. What we do in cancer is translatable to other disease, but I think they should be pulled in a separate package, because we are never going to say to somebody who has a kidney failure or hepatic failure or other lateral sclerosis and chronic disease that they are cured. While a child who have had a leukemia, Hodgkin disease, we can tell them you are cured. And so for the insurance, it's a very different issue to know that a leukemic child is cured versus somebody with chronic renal failure who will never be cured, or a diabetic who will never be cured. He can be stabilized, equilibrated, and so on, but he is not cured.
Yeah, I just would back up what Françoise said, and it's one of the things we highlighted both in what we published recently in Lancet Oncology with Françoise, and also an earlier paper that Françoise and myself published in the British Medical Journal. And in both, we were actually asked to comment on that by the reviewers, and we indicated that it's not quite the same, because you have quite a number of situations where it's a chronic disease and it remains a chronic disease, so it's not a cured disease, so you just have to take that nuance into it. So I would very much agree with Françoise on that.
No, I mean, I take the comment, and I agree. I'm just leaning on the French experience where it works globally. But yes, I agree that maybe when you start, it's better just to have one specific message if it's hard enough to convince them when somebody is cured. Yeah, I agree.
And we have a question for you, Françoise. What advice would you give to those Latin American countries that still do not have laws to end discrimination? Your microphone. We cannot hear you, Françoise.
I don't know the legal situation there and how loans are provided or not, but I think we have a model, and perhaps the model is applicable. And so I would try to push them to convince patient advocacy to discuss with their government, as they do in Chile and Costa Rica, and not reinventing the wheel, because after all, an insurance is an insurance wherever in the planet.
I guess the challenge in some countries in South America is just the general lack of legislation in relation to discrimination. So I think that's an additional challenge. But certainly Chile has obviously shown the way in South America in relation to being able to introduce the right to be forgotten. But I think it's additionally there's the challenge of inequalities in general.
It's true that in Europe we can build on the Charter of Human Rights, of anti-discrimination law, the treaties of the EU, dignity, and so on. It's true.
Okay, so I have two more topics for our today discussion, and the first, because I didn't forget from your first intervention, Françoise, you raised some concerns about the AI, and I think it's important to address this topic. Of course, we are not all experts in AI, but I think it's so important actually the development and implementation of the AI solutions to be informed by all the relevant opinions and key opinion leaders. So I will invite you first, Françoise, and then Christine and Mark to comment on this point.
Well, as you say, and as I say, I am not specialized in artificial intelligence, but I read a lot about it, and everything is getting more automated, and then you get a virtual assistant. You cannot call to your bank. You have somebody who answers, who is the little robots or whatever. And you may wonder what type of data is there to make the insurer assessing your own personal risk, and where are your data, and if they can get access to your own personal health data. Everything is a black box. So for me, we have to build ethical process in the build of this database who run artificial intelligence. I have not so much here about ethics, much more about finance, but not ethics.
Yeah, I think one of the things, Marius, that's really important, and I was just about to come up with it when Françoise said it. So ethical AI, which is a particular area, and I think this particular subject is an area where ethical AI would come to the fore, and I think it would have to be transparent in terms of knowing what are the data sources, rather than it being a black box and we don't know what the data sources are that leads to the algorithm that, it's the algorithm biased, etc. So I think it would be a very good example of developing an ethical AI algorithm that actually accurately reflects what's happening. So I think it can be advantageous to actually being able to use it to get precise information, but it needs to be done in an ethical fashion and transparently revealing what the sources of those data are.
Christine.
Yes. Vas-y, Françoise.
I know that there are banks who make big announcements that now everything will be automated and, again, no human interface. And so how these assessments are going to be made? Because the bank is linking to a big company who wants to invest to make sure to do this automated assessment on health.
So I'll be optimistic. I haven't been very optimistic during this this meeting, which is very unusual for me. So this time I'll be optimistic. I believe that the health data space regulation is going in the right direction. I think the AI Act will be able to help us with the devices. So that's me being optimistic. However, I do understand, let's say, your signals of alarms that needs to be sent to everybody. If we're talking about the right to be forgotten, it's not because AI is coming and collection of data is coming, that finally nobody's going to be forgotten and everybody's going to be, knowledge is going to be accessible to everyone. So I don't think this is where we're going unless our data will be hacked by, I don't know, a different country or the moon. But apart from that, what I think the data that the people will have will be collective data. The insurer, according to me, will not have access to the person's data. However, I would definitely wish the insurer to have easily access to, for example, he clicks because he has this request from this breast cancer patient who has received, let's say, I don't know, let's take in a country which hasn't got the right to be forgotten or wants to have information about countries who have already set up the right to be forgotten. It would be easy for these countries to have sufficient data so that the algorithms and the artificial intelligence device will be able to provide the data on the survival, the data on the risk of complications and etc. For me, once again, it would be, for me, IA relies on comprehensive, inclusive data. So that's our responsibility to make sure that we provide whatever AI is, robots or etc., mathematicians or whatever, all the data that we believe is important for each country, for each disease, for each whatever situation, including rare cancers, whatever. And after that, because we have provided all this data, I would be more reassured that the artificial intelligence work will be able to provide us for better, more efficient, and more speedy access to the data that we need. But data that would be, for me, already analyzed, because we want survival in this disease and we just click and we have it. I mean, I'm probably once again dreaming, but for me, it's what we already have for tons of situations. It's not inclusive enough. We're relying on published data. We're relying on surveys which have been done, which are not inclusive. And as you said, Françoise, it's, let's say, all women, or it's somebody who's tired or not, who's aged between, I don't know, 45 and 50, but it's not this type of cancer or this type of person in this country who faces fatigue or whatever. So I think we definitely need more data so that we can believe that artificial intelligence would help us. Mm-hmm. But the regulations are there, but I agree that regulations are big words. We need to be able to, yes, push these signals that you and Mark are alluding to. It's not because we want to be forgotten that now everybody will know about us, right?
Marius, one thing, it's sort of slightly related to this, but I'm sort of going maybe into a slightly different topic as well, and conscious we only have 6 minutes left. But one of the things that I'm scientific director at DataCam, which is the UK's health data research hub for cancer, where we look at ways in which we can use data much more effectively. But one of the things we have is the principle of fair value. And I think the principle of fair value very much plays in here as well. And that principle of fair value means that all stakeholders have to get something out of it. So if you look at it, and that's why I said earlier at the very start, I think about pragmatic solutions. So we have to have a solution that involves each of the main players. So in DataCam, that would be the patient, the health service, the researcher, and the industry. Just as for here, it would be slightly different, but it's thinking on that sort of way that, if it's all leaning towards just one stakeholder, then the likelihood of finding a solution that will actually work on a national level is probably less than if all stakeholders see sense, but also that they're all sort of getting something out of it. I think it makes it easier to deliver something as a solution.
Great.
I
So
agree.
before inviting you to look into the future and to look to the right to be forgotten from the perspective of the future national cancer mission hubs, we spoke a lot today about how important it is to act at the national level. So before inviting you, 1 minute each to have like a conclusion for our discussion, I would like to read another comment I think really interesting, because we spoke about how important it is to communicate with people, including about the right to be forgotten. And the comment said that in the 90s we said people did not act because they did not have the information, but now information is pulling from multiple sources. Quality is debatable, overwhelming and blurring people to clearly see or access the information. Maybe this should also be addressed by the mission on cancer. And we spoke already a lot about the European Cancer Patients Digital Center, who I think would be probably the most important tool to provide the right message, the right information for the right patient at the right time in the right language, local language. Okay, so we're moving towards the end of our webinar, and I would like to invite you and to keep the same order as we started the webinar. So Mark, your conclusion?
Yeah, so three things. One, opinion is the lowest form of evidence. So we need evidence both to inform how we develop more countries to be part of the right to be forgotten, but also we needed to actually collect the evidence from those who have implemented the right to be forgotten in terms of what are we learning from it that makes it better and that we can institute it on a European level. I think we have to be careful that we don't in this way accentuate inequalities. I think that's tipped on us. And I think as well, I'm a fairly optimistic person. Probably at times during this, I maybe dip down a little bit, but I think we really can deliver for the cancer survivors of Europe if we work together, if the stakeholders work together. And I think, particularly François' leadership in this has been absolutely superb. As I said, we'd only still have one. We now have 8. And we have 5, and so I think the future is bright in terms of, but we need to keep at it. We need to keep at it, and we need to make sure that we use evidence to drive change.
Françoise.
What I learned is that these ECOS creation at national level are extremely important and crucial, and I would be extremely happy to be able to collaborate and to discuss with each, because I suppose each will have specific needs or different needs, and I think it's a very interesting move to have created these hubs and to create also a coordination of hubs, because it's not need to reinvent the wheel in each hubs can benefit from each other.
Great, thank you, Christine.
So I'll repeat evidence, but as Mark said, one evidence, and I think it will also answer the request from the audience of too many information. We need to come out with one evidence, or at least how to collect this evidence and to share it. I would really wish no duplication, because very often people prefer to do it their way, right? So it's been done by others. And my last recommendation is to have one clone of Françoise in each national cancer mission hub.
Thank you.
With this, I would like to thank you, Françoise, Christine, Mark, for your great contribution in the last 2 hours. And I would like, of course, to thank to the people in the audience. It was a great interaction today. Thank you so much for your input, your comments, your questions. And of course, I would like to thank my colleagues from Center for Innovation Medicine and of course, ECOS Consortium, who work together to make this webinar happen. The webinar will be available on ECHO's social media platforms in the weeks to come. And of course, we will continue to support the right to be forgotten. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.